Chauhan and welcome to Chauhan classes for the clear. So from today I'm going to start the class 10th political science. Now as we have already completed the class 10th history, and now I will start this political science of this class. And today in this video I'm going to discuss the very first chapter of class 10th political science, and that chapter is going to be power sharing. So power sharing. Now as also know that in the last class political science, in class 9th political science, we had a journey, a very long journey of democracy, of different dimensions of democracy, and we had already seen that all the power of the government of the country doesn't rest with any one organ of the government. So you could just say that in the democracy there is a demand for power sharing as well, and that's why in this and next two chapters we will bring the idea of power sharing forward. Now in this chapter we will just discuss about the power sharing with two examples of countries like Belgium and Sri Lanka, and after that in next chapters we will discuss about power sharing in India as well. So in this chapter basically we are going to discuss about power sharing and why we need power sharing and the demand for power sharing in a democratic country. So let's start our chapter with our first topic, that is Belgium and Sri Lanka. So Belgium and Sri Lanka. Now let us discuss about these two different countries. Now Belgium, that is a very small country in Europe continent, and you could say that its area is just about Haryana, that is the state of India. So in size it is equal. It is approximately equal to the size of Haryana. And if we talk about the population, then its population is about 1 crore, about half of the population of Haryana. So that is a country, Belgium, in Europe continent, but ethnic composition of this country is very complex. Now ethnic composition, that means that ethnic composition or ethnic communities. Now you all have heard about this ethnic groups, but what do you mean by this? Let's discuss. Now ethnic groups means that two people, all those people, group of people that belong to the same culture, or those have similarities in physical or in culture, or in both you could say. Now in simple language you could just say that ethnic people are those group of people that do belong to the same culture. They need not have to be in the same religion, but they have same descent or same culture or some similarities in each other, and that's why they belong to the same ethnic communities, we just say. So you could just say that in physical, in culture, or in both, if they have similarities, then they would be in the ethnic group. They would be combined as an ethnic group. So if we talk about the ethnic composition of Belgium country, then it is a very complex. Now around 59% of the whole population lives in the Flemish region, where there are more and more Dutch speaking people, and 40% of all those population of Belgium live in Wallonia region and are French speaking people, and remaining 1% are the German speaking people. So there are mainly three groups that dominate in this country, in Belgium, that are the Dutch speaking people, the French speaking people, and the German speaking people, and in those there are more Dutch speaking people and French speaking people. Now in majority there is Dutch speaking people, and in minority there are French speaking people. But if we talk about the capital city of this country, that is Brussels, now there it is just opposite. Now there 80% of the population of the capital city Brussels is about French speaking people, and 20% is the Dutch speaking people. So in Brussels capital city you could just say that the situation is just opposite as compared to the country. Now what happened here, that you could just say that now what happened, that all those Dutch speaking people had the benefits in education and economic development only after many years. Now but for all those French speaking people who were in minority in the whole country, now they were very rich and had a very great economical development, but all those Dutch speaking people didn't have that much development even many years after, even many years later, and that led to a kind of resentment among them. So you could say that was the situation of Belgium. That is, you could say that there is a very great ethnic complication, there is a very great ethnic composition, and it is very complex, and the situation is also very kind of intense. Now what happened that if it was even more and more intense, then there would be demand for partition, and there will be demand for partition for two countries, that would be the French speaking and the Dutch speaking. And if all those majority, if we talk about the same country, for all those majority people, the Dutch speaking people, if they had more and more power just on the basis of majority, then it would also lead to a very great intense a kind of resentment or a kind of conflict among those two groups. So we will discuss about it, about accommodation in Belgium. Now what happened here is that you could just say that there could be a demand for partition as well, but the question would be the Brussels city, as it was the capital of Belgium, and there the condition was just opposite. So that was the situation of Belgium. Now next let us discuss about the Sri Lanka. Now if we talk about Sri Lanka, now what happened there, that Sri Lanka is also that a country just a few kilometers after the Tamil Nadu coast of our country. So it is a very island, you could say, and is a country as well. Now Sri Lanka also there is a ethnic composition, complexity of ethnic composition. Now what happened there, they are in majority, around 74% of the total population are the official Sinhala speakers, that are the native Sinhala speakers of Sri Lanka, and after that there are the Tamil speaking people in Sri Lanka. Now those Tamil speaking people are in minority, and even in those Tamil speakers there are two groups. There is subdivisions among the Tamil speakers in Sri Lanka. Now among those Tamil speakers, one are those the native Tamil speakers, the native Sri Lankan Tamil speakers, and the next one are the Indian Tamil speakers, like for those whose forefathers, those people's forefathers were from India and had gone there in Sri Lanka for plantation works. So you could say that all those people who had gone from India to Sri Lanka for the plantation work, and their descendants are nowadays known as the Tamil speakers, are the Indian Tamil speakers in Sri Lanka. So that is the ethnic composition in Sri Lanka. Now what happened that all the Sinhala speakers who are in majority are mostly Buddhists, and all those Tamil speakers are either Hindu or either Muslims. So that is the condition of Sri Lanka. So you could say that in Sri Lanka as well there was a resentment among people, because there were different groups, there were different composition of different people. So how was the situation handled? Let's discuss about it with our next subtopic, that is Majoritarianism in Sri Lanka. So majoritarianism in Sri Lanka. Now what happened that, let us discuss about the condition, was it settled in Sri Lanka. Now if we talk about Sri Lanka, now what happened there, that there was a concept of majoritarianism that was brought up. Now all that Sinhala speakers were now dominating over the country. Now you could say that all those government ministers, all the government was now handled by all those Sinhala speakers, and even they were preferring more and more Sinhala speakers. Now what happened that in 1956 in Sri Lanka an act was passed according to which Sinhala had become only one and only official language of Sri Lanka. That led to a conflict to Tamil speaking people, because now their culture, now the language was being erased, was being declined, wasn't being promoted, was being suppressed, you could say. Now actually in Sri Lanka what happened that now all those Sinhala speakers were now dominating over the country. Even by the elections, now there was a dominance there, or their dominance due to majoritarianism, as they were in the majority, and that's why they were now having more and more power in Sri Lanka. So that was a kind of more and more conflicts between these two groups, because now those Tamil people, many acts were passed for preferring more and more job securities and that admission in universities and colleges for more and more Sinhala speakers, not for the Tamil speakers, and there were more and more acts in prefer in promotion of their religion as well, for Buddhism, but not for the Tamil, not for the Hindu or Muslim religion, or not for any job securities. So now those Sinhala speakers were having more and more power in elections, in government, as well as now they were having more and more concessions in universities, in you could say that in job securities, in jobs, in opportunities. So there was a kind of inequality. There wasn't any kind of equality in opportunities and in employment. That led to the more and more conflicts between these two groups, and after that the condition was like a civil war. Now civil war had started in Sri Lanka. Now between these two groups, between Tamil speakers and the Sinhala speakers, the official Sinhala speakers, and what happened then, that many people had lost their livelihoods. Many families had to flee away from their countries as refugees in other countries. So many people lost their livelihoods, and finally you could say that it led to a great economic depression in the country as well. And now you will study in economic that in Sri Lanka there was a very great economic development. Economic was developing more and more, but after this, in this civil war, it led to a very great economic depression as well as many deaths. Now that group of Tamil speakers who were fighting the civil war were now being suppressed, and many people had lost their livelihoods. So that is how it was settled in Sri Lanka. Now that was a method. You could say that there wasn't any kind of power sharing in this, and that led to a very intense situation. Now let us discuss about Belgium with our next topic, that is accommodation in Belgium. So accommodation in Belgium. Now that we have discussed about the Sri Lanka, we have discussed how they faced with that situation, how they settled that situation. Now let us discuss about Belgian model. Now the Belgian leaders took a different path. Now they took a different path, and between 1970 to 1993, they had amended their constitution 4 times just to make unity in their country. Now they thought that they should respect all the minorities' culture and religions and their language and all things, and that's why they amended their constitution just to bring the unity in the country, so as both the groups, the French-speaking people and the Dutch-speaking people, would live in unity in Belgium. And if you look at some of the concepts of Belgian model, then it would be, first of all, now there was a kind of central government and the state government. Now what happened that there was a central government and the state government, and state government had its own power. It wasn't a kind of subordinate to the central government in the two regions. And after that, all the ministers in Belgium were in equal number from both the communities. Like for example, if there were 100 ministers, if there have to be 100 ministers in Belgium, then 50 would be from A community and 50 would be the B community. So if there are two communities, then there would be equal representation from both the communities in that ministers, in that government. So that was a concept that was brought up in Belgium. And after that, there was another concept of community government. Now community government that was elected by the same speaking language, by the same speaking language people, like for Dutch, French or German, no matter where they live. So you could say that community government that was formed specifically for the educational reform, for the educational upbringing and religion upbringing, culture upbringing, for a specific culture, specific religion, specific ethnic group, you could say. So for Dutch, there was Dutch community government. For French people, there was French community government that was elected by themselves. So that was being done in Belgium, and that was just a different concept compared to Sri Lanka. Now in Sri Lanka, what happened that there was a civil war as Sri Lanka, as those Tamil leaders were now demanding for a Tamil alum. Now Tamil alum in Tamil language means state. So they were not demanding for a state, but it led to a situation of civil war, and we just saw what happened there. So you could say that in Belgium the situation was just different. Now they took a method of power sharing, that is power was shared among different groups so that there wouldn't be any kind of dominance of all that majority over minority of the countries, and that was a very good part indeed. Now you might have been thinking that this system is just very complicated in Belgium, as there are thus different types of governments, different types of ministers, all the positions are already have been discussed at what position would would be of what community. So wouldn't it be very complicated? It indeed is very complicated, but it has been proven well so far. Well so far you could say that, because now there isn't a kind of all people are living in unity. There isn't a kind of civil strife between those communities, between French speaking people and the Dutch speaking people. So you could say that this method is indeed good in Belgium, as people living in Belgium may find it very complicated, but it indeed is a very good method to stop the civil strife among the different communities, so that there wouldn't be any kind of type of clashes among those groups. So you could say that was a method that was brought up in Belgium. So that was a method of power sharing. Now you could say that is why we need power sharing. Now if we talk about power sharing, why we need power sharing, why power sharing desirable. Now there could be two major reasons behind it. Now first could be prudential reason. Now prudential reason, that means that power sharing is a very good example. Power sharing is a very good form, a very good method for the stability in the country. As also know that if there isn't any kind of power sharing, then there will be civil wars, civil strifes, and that would lead to instability in the country, political instability, economical instability in the country. So that's why we need power sharing. Now you could say that is how it was done in Belgium. Now we saw that there was instability in the political government, in the polity, that because they had power sharing system, and that didn't let any kind of civil strife among them. So you could say that we need power sharing so that there wouldn't be any kind of civil strife among those communities, and that is a very good method indeed. So you could say that is, we can say that prudential system, prudential reason behind the power sharing. Now next could be the very spirit of democracy. Now democracy, all the source of power, political power, are the citizens themselves, and that's why they need to check all the decisions, they need to acquire all the decisions. All decisions must be acceptable by all the citizens, and that's why we need power sharing as well, to have the opinions of all those citizens. So you could see that first one focus more on outcomes, and second this moral, you could say that this, we can say that moral reason behind power sharing is values more and more valuable, focus more and more valuable, power sharing being valuable. So you could say that first reason could be prudential reason, and second reason could be moral reason, that focus more and valuing the power sharing method, and that's how we can say that the power sharing is desirable and is important for any democratic country indeed. And that's why we can say that in Sri Lanka it was a democracy, but it dealt with the situation very differently. We saw that in these two countries, both are democracies and both had the same difficulty, but had dealt with the same situation differently. Now our next and last topic of this chapter is forms of power sharing. So forms of power sharing. Now before power sharing, it was seen that it was felt that all power had to be rested within one person or within one group of people. But as soon as this democracy emerged, now power sharing had also emerged, and that's why now we can see different forms of power sharing in different regions, in different forms, and how this. So let's discuss about India as well. Now we can say that power sharing could be seen in different states, in different types of government, different levels of government. Now there is a government, you could say that there is a government that is for the entire country, to governing the whole country, that is known as the federal government, or in India it is known as the union government or the central government. So in India it is known as the central government or the union government, but if we talk about globally, then it is known as the federal government that rules our whole country. Now next level of government is for the state level. Now you consider that governs a whole state. Now it is known by different names in different countries. Now it is known by different names in different countries, and in India it is known as a state government. There are many countries which don't have any state government, but in India there is a state government. Now there could be a third tier of the government that is known as a municipality or panchayat in India. So these are different levels of government government as they have the power being shared among them. Now next could be that you have discussed about the different organs of the government, like the executive, the legislature and the judiciary. Now you can say that there is a system of check and balance. Now all these don't have any kind of unlimited powers, but they do check up each other. Like for example, all the ministers of executive are bound to judiciary. Now from executive is the one who appoints the judges in the judiciary, but after that when they are appointed, they can check up the discussions, the decisions made by the executive. So you could say that there is a kind of triangle that is being formed by the executive, the legislature and the judiciary. So you could say that there is a type of check and balance among them. As also that all those local ministers of state government are bound to parliament, and after that they are bound to judiciary as well. Those ministers of the central government are bound to judiciary as well, and judiciary which is appointed by those ministers, and there is a work of legislature as well. So you could say that is how we can see different forms of power sharing in our country, in the world as well. Now for instance, we had discussed in the last class political science about the reservation for women and for the social weaker social groups. Now we discussed about the reservation, that is how they have been represented among the society, in the society with reservation. So that is how for the power sharing we can also say that this is also power sharing, as it is representing all those social groups, all their social weaker groups, weaker sections of the society. Now next could be seen among the political parties, the pressures movements. Like for example, if there are political parties and there are contenders, they are kind of contenders for the contest. Now all those citizens who are electing those ministers, now they have different contenders, they have different contestants for choosing, and that's why you can say that there is a competition among all those political parties, and that is how we can say that there isn't just power being rested with one person, because all those are competing with each other for that power. So you could say that, and it can be a good example of coalition government as well. If you're talking about power sharing, then what about the coalition government? Now also know that if two parties have joined each other, have coalited each other, now if they have won the election, then what would happen, that the both parties would run the government, and that would lead to a coalition government, so that both parties would have the power in the government. So we can just say that power has been shared among them. So that is the different forms. We have seen the different forms of power sharing in political parties, in coalition government, in different levels of government, in different organs of government. Now next chapters we will discuss more and more about India as well, about the system in India as well. So this is all we have discussed in this chapter. Now in this chapter we discussed about power sharing with Belgium, where there was a system of power sharing, and with example of Sri Lanka as well. Now there wasn't any kind of Tamil alum that was represented, or there wasn't kind of representation of all those Tamil speaking people. So we have discussed about those two examples, and with the base of those two examples we can just say that power sharing is indeed very important for any democracy. And we also discussed why we need power sharing, why power sharing is desirable, and different forms of power sharing. So this is all I have discussed in this chapter. Now I have discussed all topics and subtopics, and the next chapter of this book will be covered in the further upcoming video. So thank you very much.